Liz went away on a work trip, and I had the house to myself, so I thought I'd get some weed and stay up late getting wrecked with my mate Dave. Since I got married, I can count on one hand the number of times I've been stoned. Dave put me in touch with his dealer, nice chap, very grown up and middle class. We talked music and politics, both of which we mostly agreed on. He had a few varieties on offer and let me have a sniff of each. I am no expert, so I just asked him which he would recommend. He said I should probably go for the White Willow, but mentioned offhand that he had some extra special good shit. It's expensive though, he told me. Of course, like a sucker I asked him how much. Double, that's how much. Maybe I was an easy mark, but of course, I had to know what was so great about this stuff. He smiled and said that this shit gets you super high. A really nice, spacey high. You won't even need to watch telly. Sure, he could have been trying to rip me off, but that just wasn't this guy's vibe. And anyway, Dave had vouched for him. It's not like I'm some student scraping by on a summer job. I'm 41 years old, and I earn a pretty good salary. And this was a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity to get super off my tits. So I humored him and said yeah, I'd take a look at it. So he went and fetched a stainless steel case. This, he said, is Moon Goose. If I'm honest, I couldn't really tell the difference. It looked and smelled more or less the same as the other weeds. As far as I could see, it was just in a fancy box. He pointed out the density of the crystals, the strange pinkish hue in the center of the buds. But I only had the vaguest sense that these were probably good things, without any idea of why. Trust me, he said, it's worth it. About 3 hours after Liz walked out of the door, Dave showed up. He looked at the weed and snorted. You've been had, mate. He admitted that he hadn't seen anything quite like it before, but instead, that no weeds were that much. Still, he was eager enough to try it out. Dave lit the first joint, and a pinkish sap bubbled around the charred end. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Cool." I must have lost my tolerance, cause I was destroyed after 3 drags. While Dave sat there happily puffing away, chatting all sorts of bullshit, I started to phase in and out. I remember feeling like I was floating through space, speeding past planets and stars, intermittently facing back into Dave's big red face, guffawing away at his own jokes. The hallucinogenic episodes were far from comforting. It was cold, like I was actually flying through space. I mean, I'm sure space is much colder than that, but it made the whole thing feel really real. The next thing I remember is waking up on the couch with daylight streaming through the window, and Dave nowhere to be seen. I felt like crap, more like I've been drinking than smoking. I've never had any kind of hangover of weed before. I must be getting old, I thought. My head was pounding, my limbs were stiff and achy, my lungs felt burned, and there was a horrible charred taste in my mouth. I mean, I smoke about 20 cigarettes a day, and sometimes my lungs let me know I've been abusing them, especially in the mornings. But this was way worse. It put me off smoking until late afternoon, when I got nicotine jitters. I went out to the garden and lit up, and even though it was a little tender, the first lungful going down was so good. But about halfway through the cigarette, I was coughing so hard, I was bent double. As a middle-aged smoker, I was well used to hacking up chunks, so it was only when the cigarette fell out of my shaking fingers that I figured maybe something was wrong. I went into the bathroom and leaned over the sink, I was coughing compulsively, so hard that I thought I was going to tear my throat. It felt like something was stuck in there. I wheezed and choked and thumped my chest with the flat of my fist, trying to shake it loose and bring it up. After a good 5 minutes, a massive wad of bright green phlegm flew out of my throat and splattered against the back of the sink. It stuck to the porcelain like a lump of green-brown chewing gum. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't grossed out when I dislodged it with shaky fingers so that I could wash it down the blood hole. Only when I did, I saw something that turned me cold, from my head to my feet. The tangled green gunk, film in transparent saliva, had a seam of bright red running through it. There was no mistaking it. The overloogie was full of blood. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but there's pretty much nothing more terrifying than seeing blood in your own flame, and especially in such quantities. The rest of the weed went straight in the bin. I didn't smoke for the rest of the day, or the day after that. Just thinking about it turned my stomach. The rest of my coveted time while Liz was away was spent on the couch with my phone, googling blood and flame. The horrible possibilities: lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, emphysema, chronic bronchitis. I tried to reassure myself that there were less catastrophic causes. I had been coughing a lot. The blood could have been from my throat. Maybe I had picked up a chest infection. These things were far more likely than the horror stories. But when you're past 40 and you're a heavy smoker, you're edging into high-risk territory. And all this stuff that's unlikely becomes distinctively possible. By the time Liz came home, I had quit smoking. I made my mind up. I was done. That was it for me. I wasn't going to so much as look at another cigarette for the rest of my life. As much as I mourned losing my favorite hobby, I was glad to be free of it. At the last minute, I had pulled my head out from under the guillotine. I went cold turkey. It was unpleasant, but whenever I thought about smoking, I pictured that bloody word of phlegm, and it was enough to blow even the worst cravings to smithereens. Needless to say, Liz was over the moon. I didn't speak to Dave for the next couple of weeks. I was worried that seeing him might tempt me, or at least make for an uncomfortable evening of jittery cravings. The last thing I heard from him was the day after our last session. He texted me, "Man, that shit was hardcore." I'd replied, "Yeah." And that was pretty much it. I quit smoking. Liz was happy. My friends and family and work colleagues all commented on how I smelled better, I looked healthier, and there was more color in my skin. I went on to live a happier, healthier life, and that was the end of it. Except, it wasn't. 3 weeks later, in the middle of the night, I was coughing so hard it woke Liz up, and she could sleep through a plane crashing through the bedroom wall. She asked if I was okay, and I managed to say I was fine, without sounding like I was dying, and went downstairs. This time, what I coughed up in the sink was mostly blood. It had some solidity to it, some mass of tissue. But whether it was a clot of blood or phlegm covering the stuff, it was all red. There wasn't even a trace of green mucus. I properly shat myself. If you've seen that film, Ivan's ecstasy, when he coughs up a clump of blood onto the pillow, it was just like that. And a week later, he dies of lung cancer. Not a spoiler, by the way. That's just how the movie starts. I didn't want to tell Liz, but I couldn't hide my face. I had turned white. She told me to make an appointment with the doctor. I've been meaning to check out, to see if I had escaped the high-risk bracket without some tumorous passenger coming along with me. But I just wanted to put it all out of my mind, and I had felt fine, better than ever, until now. Normally, you have to wait a couple of weeks for an appointment with the GP. I live in the UK, where we have the NHS. No idea what it's like in other countries. But when I said I'd been coughing up blood, they told me to come in as soon as I could for an emergency appointment. You know the feeling when you really hurt yourself? Like say, if you break a bone or something, and your body rings those shock alarm bells, and you go cold from your head to your feet. I've been feeling that way constantly. I was in a state of mortal terror, really considering, what I would do if this turned out to be the last few weeks of my life. I sat in the waiting room at the surgery, and this was all that I could think about. There was no escaping it. The doctor was really good. She smiled and nodded while she took my blood pressure and checked my pulse, and reassured me that whilst coughing up blood can be frightening, there could be a whole host of other explanations. It could really all turn out to be nothing. Nevertheless, she referred me for a chest x-ray the following day. I sat in the waiting room of the walk-in x-ray center for an hour and a half the next morning, shivering all the while, my teeth clattering, looking around at the other people and wondering if they could see that there was something seriously wrong with me, wondering which of them had minor complaints and which of them might have only weeks to live. My name was called, and I went into the x-ray room, and a woman told me to give the machine a big hug and breathe in while she took pictures of my insides. She told me to call my doctor next week for the results. Strangely enough, as I walked out of there, I started to feel normal again. Whether it was because I was doing something about it, or just the idea that, hey, it might all turn out to be nothing, or at least something less bad than it could be. I don't know, but I managed to go to work as normal the rest of that day, to have dinner with Liz and enjoy the conversation and the food. The surgery called the next morning. When was the earliest time I could come in? Immediately, it all came flooding back. The panic, the shaky hands, the thoughts of mortality, the cold feeling, eerily reminiscent of those hallucinatory deep dives through space. I sat in the overheated waiting room with my thickest coat on, shivering. The doctor told me that there was a large mass in my left lung. She showed me a picture, a large white blob on the negative image, which I couldn't quite convince myself was actually a photo of the inside of my body. I stopped feeling cold then. I went numb instead. My head padded with cotton wool. I nodded and responded with monosyllables what the doctor told me about the referrals and biopsies and meetings with oncologists. And all I could think was, man, I want a cigarette. I know, it was the most stupid thing I could do. It wasn't necessarily all over. There were treatment options, and there was radiotherapy and chemotherapy, and maybe I could survive with one lung and live a relatively normal life. But I couldn't quite help it. I guess the way my brain was interpreting all of this was like, hey, nothing you could do now. You're giving yourself the big Z. You might as well enjoy what time you've got left. As soon as I got out of there, I didn't call the hospital, or the specialist, or even Liz. I called Dave. I desperately needed to get out of my buzzing head, and pronto. But Dave didn't pick up, the bastard. I was sure he'd get back to me sooner or later, but I was desperate, so I called his dealer. Sod's law. He didn't pick up either. I chucked him a text. It turned into a mini essay, spilling my guts about how it was essential that I medicated myself as soon as possible, because I just couldn't handle the way this was making me feel right now. Anyway, I was sure he'd get back to me, unless I put him off with my melodrama. But for now, anyway, I was dry, and I wasn't high. I regretted having thrown the rest of that super expensive weed in the bin. Surely it would have been sensible to keep it stashed away for a rainy day. With no access to narcotics, I did the next best thing. I bought a bottle of whiskey and a 20-pack of Marlboros and a lighter, and I went home and I sat in the lounge, and I slugged from the bottle and I chain smoked my way through the cigarettes. The room was thick with smoke. Fuck it. Liz would just have to live with this. I needed this. The first drag felt so good. I mean, the head rush was so hard, it made my head swim, and the smoke was rough on my throat after not having smoked in a few weeks. But it was still just about the best sensation I'd ever felt. I started coughing almost immediately, but I wasn't going to let a little thing like a cough put me off. By the fifth or sixth cigarette, my body was shaking and my chest was burning. I got a roll of kitchen roll to cough flame into, and pretty soon, it was coming up bloody, but I already fucked myself, so it wasn't like things could get any worse. I was desensitized to the blood now. It didn't shock me anymore. All that mattered was the next cigarette, the next slug of whiskey. When I was about 15 cigs in, the coughing became so overpowering that I collapsed sideways onto the couch. The lit cigarette fell from my trembling fingers and burnt a hole in the carpet. I was spluttering blood. Fine red mist settled on the back of my hands in tiny beads. When Liz came in and found me like that, the look on her face made me realize how stupid I've been. She called an ambulance and helped me to the bathroom. I leant over, hacking chunks of red shit into the sink. My knees shook and my arms shuddered. Liz held me and cried into my neck, repeating one word over and over again. Stupid, stupid, stupid. My throat burned and my chest ached with the effort of coughing. I just wanted it to be over, but I couldn't stop. And then I felt something big give away inside of me, and my legs buckled. There was something in there, something I had dislodged in the bottom of my pipes, that was so big it was closing them off. I could hear the constricted air whistle in my throat. It didn't sound like it could be coming from me. It didn't even sound like a noise a human could make. I thumped my chest and coughed harder still, despite how much it hurt. The thing inside me lurched, and now I couldn't breathe at all. The coughing barely made any sound, just the wet squelching of my esophagus convulsed. I looked up at the mirror, and my eyes were weeping and cracked, and there was blood all around my mouth, dripping off my swollen lips. My face was turning blue, and no matter how hard I thumped my chest, I couldn't dislodge the thing that was blocking it. I knew I was going to die. This was it. I was going to suffocate right here in my own bathroom. I couldn't bear to look at Liz's face. I shoved her off, and she crumbled into a corner, sobbing. And with one final effort, I let go with my arms and dropped my chest into the edge of the sink with all my weight. And there was a crack as my breastbone hit the porcelain, and I breathed in air. I opened my eyes. I was staring into the sink. Inches away from my face, there was a mass of tissue about the size of my fist. It looked like a bag of worms cocooned in a bloody flame, and it was moving, writhing. The worms wriggled and stretched free of the sticky pink saliva, and underneath all the gore, they were shiny and black. They whipped and flashed, as if searching for something. I had the sense that this wasn't a collection of individual worms, but one organism. And as I stood there, transfixed, my forehead on the ledge at the back of the sink, I could have sworn they were reaching towards me, towards my mouth. I had no strength left to resist. I was powerless to stop them forcing themselves between my lips. But thank God for Liz. She wrenched me away from the sink, and she attacked the mass with the end of a toothbrush until it slithered down the plug hole. She told me later that she poured drain cleaner down every plug hole in the house, but I wasn't there to see that part. Shortly after the thing had been flushed, the ambulance arrived. I was rushed to the hospital by a bunch of business-like paramedics. As soon as I arrived, I was taken for an exploratory x-ray, and the mass that had appeared in my lungs before, the tumor, it was gone. It was impossible, the doctor said, for someone to cough out their own tumor. And when I suggested that maybe it wasn't a tumor, they frowned and whispered to each other. I hadn't had a biopsy yet, so they hadn't had a chance to analyze the tissue. Over the following weeks, I was subjected to a host of tests, but they found nothing, and I was given a clean bill of health. My suggestion that it could have been an organism was met with barely muted amusement. There is no known parasite that could grow to that size in a person's lung. Certainly not without being detected, and probably not without killing him. My best guess at what happened? I smoked it out. Neither Dave or the dealer ever got back to me. A month later, they found Dave floating in a local reservoir. They said it looked like he'd been hollowed out from the inside. I still don't smoke. I don't even drink tap water either.